it better. I know that you can make a change.
We spent a long time talking about how to communicate with investors. In fact, that's typically the question I'll get. Somebody will send me an email or get a phone call. Hey, can you look at this pitch? Can you look at this presentation? Can you look at this plan? Can you look at this financial model? We could probably do a whole seminar just on that. So what I want to do is explain how they look, because I think it gets at that question, because it's a really, really, really important question. So again, I'm going to work kind of a cheesy analogy here. It's very much like dating. It's very scary, a little random, and the stakes are very high. Is kind of the analogy to dating and courtship and marriage. So if you think about how, and again, I'm going to way oversimplify this. You think about kind of courtship. There's meeting, there's dating, and there's marrying, right? And the analogous kind of aspects that a venture capitalist needs to do is connecting with people, meeting entrepreneurships, listening to them to kind of, again, get those facts. And then finally, they have to make a decision, right? And we've kind of talked about, we'll talk mostly about these, but understanding kind of what goes on behind the curtain and how they make decisions. This is fact gathering, this is the actual deciding, right? Which again is a little new. So let's kind of break it down into these kind of three things. So from a dating standpoint, I couldn't resist. There's typically, broad strokes, there's an infinite number of ways, right? You can meet a partner or a potential partner. But the three that I wanted to kind of focus on as kind of categories that are helpful for thinking about it is speed dating, right? Which is an event. There's kind of data or kind of public searching, right? eHarmony is kind of this. I was a little embarrassed to log on. eHarmony showed up long after I was married, so I had not logged on. So I logged on to steal their logo. I'm like, it's this weird kind of social. It's kind of half data, virtual. It's a thing, right? But it's kind of highly targeted kind of data searching, for lack of a better description. And then there's this guy. That's Kyle Oland, who is the guy that was my roommate after college, who invited me to a church volleyball league, which then got me going to that church's singles group, where he introduced me to the woman from the first slide, my wife Tina. You can meet, and maybe the best way to meet, he'd known her, happened to grow up kind of in the area, knew who she was, gave me a few clues how not to be too stupid and embarrassing when I first talked to her, a little bit of background. It was a referral, basically, not a blind date. I had enough backbone to actually ask her out. But it's another long story sometime. But that's kind of the old-fashioned way, is a referral, right? And you can take that kind of to an extreme if you want to, and think of arranged marriages. And we don't think about it, but that's, there's actually analogies in the business world of arranged marriages. So what does that look like in the startup kind of venture capital world? Well, in the event category, here in Chicago, we have the Chicago Venture Summit. There are a bazillion of these. If you start looking for venture capital summits, Shark Tank is kind of an outgrowth of this kind of thing, right? Shark Tank is a reality version of a ventures conference, right? There's probably one every weekend of these kinds of things in different areas. Again, the idea is you get together, the entrepreneurs are up on stage, they present. Some of them are Shark Tank-like speed dating, where there's 5 minutes, and there are others where maybe there's a half an hour presentation and questions. But it's an event-driven thing. The odds of success, not super high, but it is really good practice. I will say that. If you're out speed dating, you get really good at telling your story, because you do it a lot, repetitively, very quickly. So there's some value to it, but it's kind of low probability. PitchBook, I mentioned earlier, is kind of an industry statistic. If I'm a venture capitalist, it'd be great to have an eHarmony kind of concept, right? Where I just log on to a database. Well, that's PitchBook's business model. They track companies that have venture capital backing. So I can log on here, I can plop in, I can enter in my criteria. this part of the country, this much revenue, this industry, and I can pull up a list of companies that I can send I can look at their profile, right? And then I can reach out to them and take it from there. Lastly, you know, the referrals really is kind of the classic way to get venture capital. Because the reality of a venture capitalist is most people are not horribly, they get a lot of unsolicited requests. You know, the floodgates are almost open, lots of people with lots of ideas don't do the work that you're doing here this morning of kind of thinking through how you ought to do this, and they're not selective about who they send their business plans to. So if I'm overwhelmed with kind of dating prospects, and a friend of mine who knows me and my criteria, you know, my friend Kyle knew me pretty well. He knew my theme, he knew my thesis, and he knew my criteria, right? If I'm a venture capitalist and I have a business colleague that knows my theme, knows my thesis, understands my criteria, and they refer something to me, that is like golden. That's the best way to screen. So most VC deals are driven by referrals and by some sort of kind of trusted referral, trusted advisor who passes along a name. So how do they listen? And this is where I want to come back to the question about how do you talk to a venture capitalist. There are two, if you, again, think about kind of all the stuff we talked about, there's kind of two basic storylines that you can use, right? The first one is for something that to some degree isn't novel, right? It's not new and uninvented. It's not so much an invention, it's a better business. You want to, they're listening first and foremost for, are you solving somebody's pain in the world? Is there a problem out there that you can fix better than, either doesn't have a solution or you have a better solution for it? Again, obviously in healthcare and in biotech, this is obvious. There's a disease that doesn't have a cure, right? Then they're going to listen and think, okay, does this solution really work? Do I think this works? Is it better, faster? And is it unique? Okay, it's not just enough if, again, if I come back to the coffee shop example, there might be a neighborhood that doesn't have a lot of coffee. I come up with a solution being a coffee shop. But the question is, what makes it unique? You know, is it massively better? Is it massively faster? Is it massively cheaper? One of the things you're looking for here is an unfair competitive advantage. You really want to have a sense that to be successful, you can't just be a little bit better, right? So if you're going to plop down next to Starbucks, you better have something that's way different or way better than Starbucks, right? Because the solution that's kind of in the market, it may not be perfect, but it's okay. Then, from an economic standpoint, it has to be scalable. And this is where kind of the financial model, you tell your story for the financial story here. As I make more of it, I get better at selling it or better at making it. And again, this is back to kind of the stuff that we were talking about with the Entrenuity training, the Starting Up Now training. Really working through that exercise, it costs me a certain amount to make 10 cups of coffee. If I make 1,000 cups of coffee, is it cheaper or more expensive to make 1,000? There's not always a clear answer, right? You know, is it a neighborhood business? Is it a city-wide business? Is it a regional business? Is it a national business? Is it an international business? Those are the kinds of things that you're trying to answer here as you present. Then they're listening. This is the piece that trips up a lot of people. Venture capital funds, as I said, even though they have a very long time horizon, it's not forever. You know, they're not in this business to run it and hand it off to their grandchildren. Right? It's not they don't do family businesses. They sell businesses, right? Venture capitalists are in the business of growing and selling businesses. So that's referred to as an exit event. How do they get their money back? Because they have to give it back to the Chicago Teachers Pension Fund, right? So once you've demonstrated that they've heard this problem, they've heard why the solution is unique and scalable, they've figured out how they can actually get out of this. Now you talk about, the team and why you have assembled the team that's unique for this piece of it, right? One of the common things that happens is people hear, I'm not the only one that says it, everybody says this. They talk about the team, the team, the team. Bet on the jockey, not the horse. The management's the most important part. And what people hear is, that's the most important thing, so I should talk about it first. And the counterintuitive thing that most people don't understand is, if I'm going to invest money in an opportunity, in a business, I don't know if you're any good until I understand the situation, right? So Michael Jordan, to overstate it to kind of make the example, Michael Jordan comes and introduces himself first in the presentation. Ta-da! Woo! Awesome, it's Michael Jordan. Then you find out you're playing hockey, right? You want to explain, we're going to play hockey. Then Michael, or baseball, let's pick on baseball. Let's go. I was trying not to go that. Oh my gosh. It makes no sense. Evaluating a management team without understanding what they're trying to do is like evaluating an athlete without knowing what game they're going to be playing. So explain the game. When you're presenting, you have to be polite and introduce yourself. And don't take it to kind of an extreme. But if you're going to go off, and keep working on you can tell I'm a coffee addict too. If you're going to open a coffee shop, explain that first, and then go, and guess what? I worked at a coffee shop for 10 years. I managed a Starbucks. I managed an independent place. Da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Then you have a massive amount of credibility, right? Because you've explained the game, and now you explain why you're the right athlete. And again, I don't say entrepreneur, I don't say founder, I don't say owner, I say team. It's very rare that one person kind of on their own is enough. You need to explain kind of how that team's gonna work. So, and then, you gotta ask, right? At the end, they need to know, and they're listening for, again, some of those criteria. And this comes back to some of the questions we were talking about with solopreneur. I may love this whole story, right? But you might need $50,000 and my minimum investment is $1 million. Or the flip side is, you might need $100 million to build like some factory somewhere, right? And I can invest $1 million to $5 million, right? Or I need a decision. The timing is a great example because, I mean, again, venture capitalists have constraints just on how much they can do in a day, like most people. They may not be able to, they may say, look, we're just not doing any new investments for the next 6 months because we just happened to make 3 new ones. We're incredibly busy. We can't honestly tell you we have time right now. Love, 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 love. If you can wait 6 months or 9 months or a year, well, we love it. But if you need the money in the next 3 months, I'm not your person. So that's option A. Now, option B comes a little bit to the question, and I won't spend nearly as much time, I'll just kind of throw this up by contrast. The other version of the story is that you've invented something insanely cool, right? I'll just kind of click through this to get it all the way kind of out. So, mad professor invents Flubber, right? Remember the old Disney movie? There's nobody in the world going, gosh, I wish we had more Flubber, right? You've come up with something really interesting that doesn't have an immediate kind of need or opportunity in the market. What they're listening for now is, okay, we've got Flubber. Are you the guys, are you the team to figure out what different problems might be solved by Flubber in a unique way, right? So there's these different problems that Flubber might apply to. This might be a unique solution and they might be scalable. You've got to have the team's job now is not to just solve one problem and grow the business. They're trying to figure out what business do we build, right? Who needs Flubber the most? Who's willing to pay for Flubber the most, right? So you have kind of this flow that gets you potentially And maybe Flubber works on 2 of them, and you get, combined, an amazing exit. So that's a little bit different story. So if you've invented something that's truly different, that's driven first by kind of the science or the technology, then you start with that, and you go, Eureka, this is what we discovered. We're the people, we need some capital to go, and so I think the checklist is down here. We need the capital to go figure this out, right? And we don't know. We don't know exactly, we know it solves the problem, we just don't know which one, right? And you see that again sometimes with what I would call more hard science stuff. Some mad professor will come up with some semi-conducting something or other that nobody can pronounce, that they're like, oh, this will make computers 100 times faster. It's like, okay, maybe, but is it for this or that or the other? Same thing, you see it in the medical world all the time. They don't even know if the stuff works half the time. And then they discover it works for some other disease. So those, when you're telling your story, that's what they're listening to. Now, the last thing I'll talk about, to try and kind of pull the curtain back a little bit, is when you're thinking about, again, it's not just a check the box kind of situation. And this is particularly true for smaller firms, and it's true for angel investors, right? You can talk all day, right, about what kind of criteria they're looking for, what kinds of opportunities. That's a very check the box. Yes, I'm software. Yes, I'm SaaS. Yes, I'm located in Chicago. Yes, we have the right amount of, yes, 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 and still not get the money. And the difference is because of the how, right? And this is kind of the stuff that goes on behind the curtain. There's 3 major decision-making models. There are some, particularly at smaller firms, where an individual partner will make a decision and write a check. And at that point, it's about the personality, right? That partner may or may not just like you, because the marriage analogy is not completely inappropriate, and VCs will tell you this. They've turned down deals just because I don't want to work with the person. They just, great business, great technology, great market. I don't know, they're left-handed, and I just don't like left-handed people. It's a personality thing. It's really no different, because they will tell you, look, I may have to sit in a boardroom 10 or 12 years with this person, and that's longer than a lot of marriages, unfortunately. So that's very much about personality. There's also kind of a classic committee structure in some firms, and this is kind of mid to larger sized firms, where the partner's out front, the individual that you're dealing with, because almost all of them you're dealing with a specific point of contact. I should back up and explain that. Again, similar to a bank, you don't deal with a bank, you deal with a loan officer, right? And that person represents the institution. All your negotiations are back and forth with kind of one person, or maybe somebody that's helping them with the analysis. But most often there's a committee process, and there's kind of this unwritten rule that these investment committees all meet on Monday mornings, industry-wide. It's the strangest. It's a great thing. But every Monday there's partner meetings. Don't try to get a hold of a venture capitalist on a Monday. Just don't. They're in a meeting. I promise. It's true. We have our investment committees on Monday. We all just kind of go off and do our internal meetings on Monday, and then we do external stuff Tuesday through Sunday. But you're dealing with that. That person may love you, your deal, the opportunity. Absolutely, you check every single box, right? They got to go pitch their partners, right? And maybe it's majority rule. Maybe somebody has a veto. There's a whole bunch. We've all known for as many committees as there are in the world, there's different rules about how committees make decisions. At this point, it's kind of about the institution, not the individual, right? Is this a good fit for us overall? And a lot of times, you have to remember, this person is now your advocate right? You've convinced them, you've got to give them the tools to convince their committee, okay? The last dynamic is, I want to draw a little bit of a distinction between what I would call a committee model, and which is more formalistic, and a consensus model, right? And it's the consensus model is particularly common in smaller firms. Again, if you go back to NextView, the web page that I showed, there's only 6 people on that kind of staff page. 2 of them were not deal partners. Okay, so there's really only 4 people. They oftentimes will actually, all 4 people meet with you. In these kind of committee situations, particularly bigger firms, you may never meet or talk to this particular person, right? They've had a vote, but you may not necessarily meet with them, okay? They're pretty busy, or it's just there's too many of them. In a consensus-driven model, you're gonna have interaction. Again, you've got, I probably should use a slightly different icon here. You've got one particular point person or advocate, but you have to deal with the personalities directly of the group, okay? And that's very different than dealing with an institution, right? Because 2 of these people may be on your board, or, you know, again, it's just, you've got to have that kind of fit with all of them. And they collectively, in these models, almost everybody has a veto. It's a very common model where it's unanimous, that if partner C just really has a bad feeling about it, or there's some specific data, or they have some specific reservations, they are, I didn't go deep on the economics of how a fund works, but these 3 people are tied at the hip, like surgically, because if this person loses a lot of money, it comes out of everybody's pocket. So that's why the decision making is often, everybody meets the entrepreneur, everybody's got to have kind of a fit. Now again, bigger firms, this is almost more bankish like, and there are firms that operate that way, but these are probably the most common. So, number one thing to remember about how VCs look for deals. This is true for anybody that's ever going to write a check at any level. Even my wife gets kind of joke with my boys. They wanted to open up a lemonade stand. They should understand how I make decisions about lemonade stand investing, right? You need to ask about things like their thesis. Some of it's publicly available, the details probably are not, right? But once you get into a process with a banker, right, what kind of information does the committee need? What's the underwriter do? How long will it take? You know, are there ratios that I need to hit? You know, those kinds of things. If it's an angel investor, asking questions about timing, asking questions about other things they've invested in, asking questions about, like if it's an individual angel investor, you honestly ought to understand how their spouse comes. You know, how does your family help you make decisions? Is this money kind of in your personal family account, or is it in a separate business that you've set up? You need to ask all of those questions. It's again similar to a dating process in that if you really want to get to know the other person, you got to ask questions about how they make decisions, how they run their business, what you should expect in the future, all of that stuff. And this is probably the biggest thing that when you hear people like me or anybody else, or you read something on the internet about how to raise money, don't be shy about asking people questions. You know, if you step over some invisible boundary, they'll tell you, right? Or they just won't tell you, or they'll give you an ambiguous answer. And you could probably, again, do a whole seminar just on kind of things you ought to ask. I'll give you a really simple one that everybody should ask about a venture capital fund. I talked about the fact that they have a 7 to 10 year life, right? And they have maybe, say, a 3 or 4 year investing period, right? So if I have a business and I go to a fund and it's their very first year of investing, I know they've got 9 years before they need to sell my business. So I got time to fix things, I got time to grow, I got time to make mistakes, I've got time to change things and grow. I got 9 years. That's you know, hopefully enough time to grow a business. If it's the 4th year and they need to start exiting in year 8, right? Now all of a sudden I've only got 4 years, and I'm at the tail end. I'm one of the last investments they've made. They've already been hanging out. So to some degree, once you're in the portfolio, you're competing for dry powder. So a fund, if it's, say, again, my mythical $85 million fund, you probably only invest half of that, right? You save the other half for follow-on investments for when people need growth capital. Well, now I'm not competing with the whole world. I'm competing with the other companies in the portfolio for the rest of the money that the VC has, right? So if it's year 4, and I'm competing with the guy that they've already been in business with for 4 years, he's got 9 years to grow and exit his business, and I only have 4. It's not a great spot. You don't want to be the last investment in a fund if you can avoid it. So there's those kinds of things that you're not going to know unless you ask a bunch of questions. There, again, for anybody starting any kind of business that's going to take capital from the outside, those are the kinds of questions. When do you need to sell the business? How much more can you invest? You know, are you retiring soon? Right? You're talking to a typical angel investor, successful business person. They're 57, right? Their retirement is fair game to ask questions about, because it matters to how active they're going to be, what they're going to need money for. Do not be shy about asking. So that kind of brings us to the end of kind of why they look. Good. Why, what they look for, and then how they look. Questions?
Know that you can make it better. I know that you can make a